In the autumn of 1971, deep in the Appalachian mountains of West Virginia, a small hospital witnessed something doctors would never forget. A 17-year-old girl entered the delivery room, terrified and silent, but the truth was far darker than her age. The father of her child was her own brother. What was delivered that October morning was described by one doctor as a body nature itself tried to reject. Records were sealed, yet the whispers never stopped. Welcome to Hidden Docs. Here, we uncover the stories buried in America's darkest corners. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so these hidden files keep reaching you. Tonight, we enter the Appalachian hollers, where bloodlines twisted in ways nature never intended, and where one family's secret birth still lingers like a curse. The Appalachian Mountains are as old as time itself, silent ridges stretching from Alabama to the coal towns of West Virginia. To outsiders, they look beautiful, a place of autumn leaves and mountain songs. But for those who've lived here for generations, these mountains carry a darker story, one of poverty, secrecy, and families cut off from the world. In the 1970s, Boone County, West Virginia, was a land in decline. Coal mines that once brought life to the region were closing. Men were out of work. Families were hungry. Entire towns shrank into ghostly shells of what they once were. And when the jobs left, so did the outsiders. What remained were families who stayed rooted, clinging to land that had been theirs for 100 years or more. But in isolation, something else took root, something far harder to talk about. Generations of intermarriage. In these small mountain hollers, where travel was rare and strangers were few, bloodlines folded back on themselves. Cousin married cousin. In some cases, even closer relations did. It wasn't something people admitted openly, but everyone in Boone County knew. Everyone had heard the whispers. The story isn't unique. Across Appalachia, real cases prove that this isolation left marks in ways the world couldn't ignore. Just one county over in Kentucky, the infamous Blue Fugates became a medical sensation. For nearly 200 years, members of that family had intermarried, passing along a rare genetic condition that turned their skin a shocking shade of blue. Doctors studied them. Newspapers mocked them. They became a public oddity, the price of generations of bloodlines, never mixing with outsiders. Then there are the Whitakers of Odd, West Virginia. Perhaps the most haunting modern example. When documentary filmmaker Mark Leiter visited them decades later, he described their lives in chilling detail. Siblings who barked instead of spoke. Generations of deformities. A family tree that spiraled inward instead of outward. Appalachia had become a mirror held up to the rest of America, showing what happens when poverty, shame, and secrecy are allowed to run for generations without interruption. And in Boone County, in the autumn of 1971, this truth would reach its darkest expression. A 17-year-old girl, pregnant. The father, her own brother. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't folklore. Doctors would soon confirm the unthinkable. And what was born that October morning would scar them for the rest of their lives. The mountains have always kept their secrets, but some secrets claw their way back out of the dirt, refusing to stay buried. The family lived far outside the small town of Madison, Boone County's seat. Their house wasn't a home so much as a decaying structure, a clapboard shack with tin patched across the roof and chickens scratching through the dirt yard. For most outsiders, the place didn't even exist. Locals didn't go there. They whispered about it, pointed toward the ridge where it sat, and warned their children to stay away. The family name repeated through local history. In census records, in marriage licenses, in faded church logs, the same surnames crossing and recrossing, generation after generation. First cousins marrying first cousins, uncles marrying nieces. By the mid-20th century, their family tree had stopped branching outward. It folded back in on itself like a snake swallowing its own tail. This wasn't unusual in Appalachia. A 1972 survey by West Virginia University quietly noted that consanguineous unions, blood relatives marrying blood relatives, were not uncommon in rural pockets. Poverty, geography, and religious insularity all played a part. Families stayed put, roads were poor, outsiders weren't welcomed, and when choice was limited, bloodlines closed in dot. But this family stood out even among the Hollers. Church records from the 1930s list scandalous unions connected to their name. Local preachers, powerless to stop it, simply noted the marriages without comment. In courthouse marriage licenses, the same pairs of surnames reappear, almost like an echo. To genealogists, it is a sign of extreme inbreeding. To locals, it was simply the way they lived. Among the children born into this household was a girl. We'll call her Sarah, though her true name is known in faded county records. She was born in 1954, the sixth of 8 children. Sarah never attended school. Like her siblings, she worked on the family's small farm, hauling water, tending animals, cooking alongside her mother. For her, the outside world was nothing more than an occasional trip into town. By the time Sarah turned 16, the family's reputation was already infamous. Children in Madison teased one another with the threat of being sent up to Sarah's ridge. Adults spoke in hushed tones when her family came to church. Even within a community that tolerated cousin marriages, this household was different. In 1971, Sarah was 17, and she was pregnant. In most small Appalachian towns, a teenage pregnancy wasn't news. It happened often enough, usually ending in shotgun marriages and whispered apologies at church. But this pregnancy was different. Everyone knew who the father was. Her own brother. Locals debated whether it was forced or whether it was simply accepted by the family as natural. Some whispered darker things, that her parents encouraged such pairings to keep bloodlines pure, untainted by outsiders. Whether rumor or truth, Sarah carried the burden. And as her belly grew, so did the fear in the community. Because everyone knew that when this child was born, it would not be like other children. They were right. Asterisk. By late spring of 1972, Sarah's condition could no longer be hidden. Her swollen belly forced whispers into the open. Families in Madison whispered at church. Some claimed they saw her walking barefoot through the streets with her brother beside her, both silent, both avoiding every stare. Doctors in Boone County hospital were not surprised when she arrived in labor that June. They had seen cases like this before. Children born of close kin, arriving into the world with frail bodies, misshapen skulls, or lungs that barely drew breath. But this case would test even their hardened nerves. The delivery was long and brutal. Sarah, just 18, screamed through the night. Nurses later recalled that her parents refused pain medication for her, insisting, "She'll bear it, as women in our family always have." By morning, the child came into the world. It was a boy. At first glance, the infant looked normal, but within hours, the complications appeared. His jaw was misshapen. His chest rose in uneven, shallow breaths. A geneticist would later note the obvious, severe congenital defects consistent with inbreeding. But in that hospital ward, there was only silence. Nurses exchanged glances they dared not put into words. The family demanded no name be written on the birth certificate, at least not the real one. Officially, the baby was recorded as live male infant, with the father's section of the certificate left blank. But everyone in Boone County knew the truth. The father was Sarah's brother. The community reeled. In small towns, gossip spreads faster than wildfire. But here, people didn't just gossip. They recoiled. Neighbors who once offered spare food to the family now shut their doors. Preachers thundered from pulpits about Sodom and Gomorrah, warning that sin begets sin. And yet, something stranger happened. Officials tried to bury the case. The hospital made no public statement. Newspapers that reported on every mine accident and every church fundraiser suddenly had nothing to say. It was as if the child had been born into silence, and Boone County wanted to keep it that way. Why? Some believe it was embarrassment, that exposing the case would shame the entire community, feeding ugly stereotypes about Appalachian people. Others believe it was fear, that too much exposure would invite state intervention, child services, or worse, national media descending on Madison. So the story of Sarah's child was not printed, not recorded, not told. It lived only in whispers, but whispers are sometimes louder than screams. For the townsfolk, the mystery was this: would the child survive? Could a boy born of brother and sister live past his first fragile years? And if he did, what kind of life could he possibly lead? That question would haunt Madison for decades. Against all odds, the child survived. Doctors expected him to die within days. His lungs rattled with each breath. His feeding was inconsistent, and his body showed signs of congenital deformities. But the boy clung to life with a stubbornness no one could explain. Sarah, barely more than a child herself, rocked him through the long nights, while her brother, the father, lurked in the shadows, never holding the baby, but always watching. Neighbors whispered about the boy. Some said he was a curse, that no child born of such sin could bring anything but ruin. Others pitied him, believing he was innocent, a victim of generations of secrecy and silence. Either way, the child became an unspoken symbol of everything the community wanted to deny. By the winter of 1973, the boy was still alive. His body was frail, his speech delayed, his head slightly misshapen, but he endured. A traveling pediatric specialist who visited Boone County that year quietly wrote in his notes, "Severe genetic complications suspected, possible sibling parentage case." Those notes were never made public. They were filed away, tucked into dusty cabinets where they would remain hidden for decades. The town, however, could not hide what was in plain sight. The boy's presence made every secret harder to keep. When he cried in the middle of the night, neighbors claimed they could hear it echoing through the hollows. When Sarah walked him through the street, women pulled their children closer. Madison became a stage where everyone played their role, some silent, some condemning, and some just trying to forget. Yet the greatest silence came from the authorities. Child Protective Services never intervened. The county courthouse never opened a SARU file. It was as though an unspoken agreement had been reached. What happened in that family stayed buried. But history has a way of unearthing the very things people try to conceal. The boy grew, slowly, awkwardly. By age 5, he struggled to speak, often relying on gestures instead of words. By age 7, he was kept out of school, hidden away in the family's crumbling house on the edge of town. His world became the woods and the dirt roads that circled the family's land. And all the while, the question lingered. How many other families in Boone County had similar stories? How many other children were hidden, born not out of love, but of desperation, isolation, and generational secrecy? In 1976, a sociological study out of West Virginia University quietly reported a rise in consanguineous unions, marriages or relationships between relatives, in parts of Appalachia. Though it did not name Madison directly, locals felt exposed. The shame of one family was becoming the shame of a region. And the boy, the child who shouldn't have lived, was the living proof. His existence was both a miracle and a curse, a reminder that silence cannot erase reality. But what no one could have predicted was how his life and his suffering would resurface decades later when America finally looked at what it had tried to bury. For years, the boy's life was shrouded in secrecy. Madison's streets knew the rumors, but nobody dared put them on paper. No reporter wrote the words. No sheriff signed a warrant. Silence was safer. But silence is fragile. By the late 1980s, whispers from Boone County began reaching outsiders. A local nurse, long retired, recalled delivering Sarah's child under extraordinary circumstances. She described the strange, unnatural hush in the delivery room, the way the doctors avoided each other's eyes. She spoke of one physician who quit medicine entirely after that day, leaving the state and never returning. Her testimony, though private, hinted at something larger. If she was willing to speak, how many others carried fragments of the same story? Then came the photographs. In 1990, a faded collection of medical images surfaced in a university archive, mislabeled and almost forgotten. The images showed a child with visible deformities, features so severe that some questioned whether the photos were even real. Among them was a file marked Appalachian Case Study, Suspected Sibling Incest. The academic world took notice. A small circle of geneticists debated the authenticity of the case, but no one wanted their name attached publicly. Publishing on such a subject meant professional risk. Still, the whispers grew stronger. By 1992, the story had taken on the shape of a ghost legend. Campfire tales told of a boy locked away in the hollers of Boone County, born of a brother and sister. Skeptics dismissed it as folklore, another Appalachian myth like Mothman or the Flatwoods Monster. But those who had lived through it, those who saw Sarah walking with the child, knew it was no myth. And then came the Whitakers. In the early 2000s, documentary filmmaker Mark Later began filming the Whitaker family of Odd, West Virginia. His footage shocked the world. A family so deeply inbred that communication itself had broken down. Their lives were raw proof of what happens when generations collapse inward. Though not directly linked to Sarah's case, the Whitakers reopened old wounds. People in Madison began whispering again. Wasn't there another family decades earlier who had a child just as broken, just as trapped by bloodlines? The connections were circumstantial, but they were undeniable. And this time, the whispers had evidence. Archival medical notes, forgotten photographs, and memories from those who had tried for too long to bury the truth. The case of Sarah and her brother was no longer folklore. It was history. Dark, shameful, and still unresolved. And yet, one question burned brighter than the rest. What became of the boy? By the mid-1990s, the boy who had once been the center of whispers was gone. Not dead, at least not officially. Just gone. No school records existed after his 7th birthday. No medical files after 1978. The name listed on his birth certificate seemed to vanish from the county's courthouse registry. For years, no one in Madison could say exactly when he disappeared. Some claimed he had been taken in the night by state authorities, hidden in an institution where children like him were warehoused and forgotten. Others whispered something darker, that the family themselves had made him disappear to silence the shame once and for all. The truth remains buried. When journalists revisited Boone County decades later, asking about Sarah and her child, they were met with silence and hostility. One neighbor told a reporter in 2005, "You don't dig up bones that ain't yours. Leave the past where it belongs." Another quietly admitted she hadn't seen the boy since the late 1970s. He would have been a teenager by then. But whether he lived into adulthood, no one can say. The timeline is riddled with shadows. In 1981, a local hospital documented the sudden death of an unnamed male patient, estimated age 10. Cause of death, congenital heart failure. The file contained no next of kin, no burial details, and no obituary in the local paper. Could this have been Sarah's son? Or was it another child, another secret case swallowed by Appalachia's silence? Even more chilling are the unconfirmed accounts from state social workers who, in the 1980s, described isolated Appalachian children with severe genetic defects housed in rural institutions. Most of those records were destroyed in the early 1990s as states purged outdated files. If Sarah's boy was among them, his story may be forever erased. But not everyone accepted that silence. In 2017, a group of online researchers tracing Appalachian genealogy forums rediscovered references to Sarah May Whitaker. In those threads, locals hinted that her son had not died young at all, but lived into adulthood, hidden in plain sight, cared for by distant relatives until the 1990s. If true, then his absence from public record wasn't an accident. It was deliberate concealment. Why? Because the boy was living proof of a generational crime, the collapse of a family tree into itself, a symbol too damning to let survive in the public eye. And so the boy vanished, leaving behind only fragments, whispers, photographs, medical notes and rumors that refuse to die. Which leaves us with one haunting question. Did Sarah's son grow old in silence, or was his life cut short to bury the truth? Sarah's story was not an anomaly. It was a symptom. By the late 20th century, researchers were quietly uncovering a troubling truth. Appalachia, isolated by geography and poverty, harbored far more cases of consanguinity than the public realized. Roads were few, schools were scarce, and families often married within their own bloodlines simply because there were no outsiders nearby. Generations collapsed inward, creating genetic entanglements that few outsiders wanted to acknowledge. In 1983, a study published in the Journal of Heredity noted unusually high rates of congenital defects in pockets of eastern Kentucky and West Virginia. Though the authors avoided sensational language, their findings were clear. Inbreeding was silently shaping lives in the Appalachian region. And Sarah May Whitaker's son was only one of many. The problem was not limited to Appalachia. Across America, from rural Alabama to the Ozarks of Missouri, similar cases existed, hidden in census records, medical files, and unmarked graves. Most were never publicized, shielded by families terrified of shame or communities that preferred silence over exposure. But some cases slipped through the cracks of secrecy. In 2004, the Colt family of New South Wales, Australia, became international news when police discovered an entire clan living in isolation, their children the product of multiple generations of incest. The shock of that case forced Americans to reconsider their own shadows. If it could happen there, why not here? And then came the Whitakers, filmed in odd West Virginia. Mark Later's 2020 documentary shook millions worldwide. Viewers were horrified not only by the family's condition, but by the realization that such lives existed in modern America. Hidden in plain sight. The parallels were undeniable. Sarah's son, born in 1971 to her own brother, fit the same tragic pattern. He wasn't just the product of one family's failure. He was part of a quiet epidemic, one America refused to confront. The tragedy ran deeper than genetics. It was about silence. Authorities looked away. Churches buried the whispers. Neighbors told children not to ask questions. And when the evidence surfaced, in medical photos, dusty archives, and hushed testimonies, it was quickly filed away, as though acknowledging it would stain the national image. But the stains were already there. From the hills of Boone County to forgotten institutions across the South, children like Sarah's son existed, unseen, unheard, and often unnamed. And if Sarah's boy truly vanished in the 1980s, his disappearance was not an isolated event. It was part of a broader effort to bury America's darkest family secrets. Yet secrets have a way of clawing back into the light. Because every photograph, every medical file, and every whisper left behind becomes another piece of evidence, another reminder that America's hidden epidemic was real and may not be as far in the past as we'd like to believe. By now, the story of Sarah May Whitaker feels less like rumor and more like a crime scene, one without closure. Every fragment we've uncovered, the hushed testimony of doctors in 1971, the missing school records, the anonymous medical photographs, and the silence of Boone County itself, paints a picture too dark for coincidence. This wasn't just one broken family. It was a wound America chose to bandage in silence rather than expose to light. The boy at the center of it all became more than just a child. He became a symbol of how secrecy can deform not just the body, but an entire community. Whether he died young in a forgotten hospital bed, or lived on hidden among relatives. His existence threatened the illusion that these cases were rare. Because Sarah's story tells us something America never wanted to admit, that inbreeding was not confined to folklore, not just to hillbilly myths or horror films, but to real families with real names and real children. And yet, no official report has ever acknowledged him. No obituary marks his passing. His name is absent from the archives of Boone County, erased as though he never lived. But the witnesses say otherwise. The photographs say otherwise. The silence itself says otherwise. What is more haunting? The fact that this boy likely died in obscurity, or the possibility that he lived for decades, hidden in plain sight, carrying with him the genetic scars of generations. Perhaps the greatest truth buried in Sarah's case is not about her son, but about us, about the lengths we will go to protect illusions of purity, of morality, of normalcy. The boy was a victim of bloodlines, yes, but more than that, he was a victim of silence. And silence is the most dangerous inheritance of all. Because every time America buries stories like Sarah's, it ensures that others remain hidden, others go unspoken, others are erased before they can ever be understood. Which leaves us here, piecing together fragments, staring into shadows, and asking the one question that still lingers like a curse over Boone County, over Appalachia, and perhaps over America itself. What happened to Sarah's child, and why has no one, even half a century later, dared to answer? The story of Sarah May Whitaker is not folklore. It is not fiction. It is a case buried in silence, scattered across dusty medical files, fading photographs, and the uneasy memories of those who lived nearby. We may never know the full truth. Did her child die young? His name erased before it could be written into history? Or did he live on, hidden from the world, a breathing reminder of a family tree that folded in on itself? What we do know is this: the past leaves clues, and every time one of these hidden cases surfaces, it forces us to confront not only what happened in Appalachia, but what America chose to forget. Because in the end, Sarah's story is not just about one child. It is about silence, secrecy, and the shadows we prefer not to face. And that is why we tell these stories. Welcome to Hidden Docs. Here, we uncover the files America tried to bury. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Your state, your country, your hometown. And if you want these stories to keep reaching you, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications, because this is not the last story hidden in the dark. And some secrets are still waiting to be found.